Subscribe and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
Hi. After having learned a lot about any subject, the big question that one is faced with is what can be asked in the interview? In this video, we are going to take a quick look at the interviewer's perspective and approach towards conducting the interview, and then we will see how to organize and categorize our learning about the various terms and concepts related to the subject. That itself is helpful to assess one's own knowledge, get an idea where one stands, and to further equip oneself so as to be well prepared and confident for the interview. So let us get started with the interviewer's perspective and approach. Well, the interviewer would want to know about the candidate with a question like, "Tell me about yourself," would want to know about the qualifications and experience, would want to make an assessment of the knowledge of the terms and concepts related to that subject, and also to assess the skills necessary for that particular job role. Now, to make an assessment of the knowledge and skills, there could be three types of questions that can be put forth. The simplest one would be to know if the candidate remembers the important terms and concepts and is able to recall them when asked. At a next higher level, the interviewer would want to make sure that the candidate cannot just only recall the terms and concepts, but also has a good understanding of them. At the next level, the interviewer would want to know if the candidate has the ability and the skills to apply them in the respective scenarios for that particular job role. This brings us to the need for a cognitive approach for preparation. So here we will look into the classification of the types of questions that can be framed into three categories, the three cognitive levels of knowledge, as well as the learning objectives for each level of knowledge. We will see some example questions for assessing knowledge at each level, and then we will go on to see some must-know question sets for level 1, that is remember, level 2, that is understand, and level 3, that is apply. So by now, it is almost obvious that the three cognitive levels of knowledge that one needs to attain is level 1, remember, level 2, understand, and level 3, apply. So in the next slide, we will go on to see what are the learning objectives for each level of knowledge. Coming to the learning objectives for each level of knowledge, we find that the objective for level 1 are attained if the candidate is able to identify, recall, or recognize a term or concept. The learning objectives for level 2 will said to be met if the candidate is in a position to explain or summarize, compare, classify, differentiate, and give examples for the testing concept. The objectives for level 3 will said to be attained if the candidate is able to carry out a procedure to prepare, apply, use, or implement it in a given context. So now let's come to some example questions for assessing knowledge at each level. First of all, level 1, that is remember. So there could be questions like, can you identify the main objective of testing? Can you recall the 4 levels of testing, or simply which are the 4 levels of testing? Do you recognize the importance of a tester in product development? So we see that they are using certain keywords which are identify, recall, recognize. And for level 2, that is understand, there could be questions like, can you explain the importance of the requirement traceability matrix? Can you summarize the contents of a test plan? Can you compare the waterfall model and the V model? So comparison means look for similarities, dissimilarities, or both. Can you classify testing into two main categories? Can you differentiate functional and non-functional testing? For level 3, we could have questions regarding how to apply, implement, prepare, or use. So there could be questions like, how will you apply boundary value analysis to a field age on a registration form to test if it accepts age in the range 4 to 16 years, both inclusive? So one should know how to apply the boundary value analysis. Next question, as a tester, how can you best contribute towards implementing a test plan? Can you prepare a good defect report? So certainly one needs to know what goes into preparing a good defect report. How will you use equivalence class partitioning to derive test cases for a field marks which should accept only numeric values? So one needs to know how to apply equivalence class partitioning. Let us now look at a set of questions based on attainment of objectives for level 1 of knowledge. There are 7 testing principles. Can you recall a few of them? What is the relation between testing and quality assurance? Which of the many SDLC models do you know about? Can you name some important documents that should undergo static testing before being given out for use? Can you identify some benefits of early testing? Can you recall some factors for a successful review of any document or work product? Can you recall some metrics for testing? Why was a new methodology agile needed when many SDLC methodologies already existed? What are requirements called in the agile methodology? Do you know the 4 values of agile? Have you read about the 12 principles of agile? Can you recall any 2 of them? In which year was the Agile Manifesto published? Can you recall the names of some commonly used Agile frameworks? Which is the Agile framework whose name is based on the concept of JIT, that is just in time? Which Agile framework is popularly used for software development projects? The complexity of a user story is represented in terms of a value from the Fibonacci series. What is the value called? Which term in Agile denotes the amount of work that a team can accomplish in an iteration, that is a sprint? Can you mention the types of reports generated in Jira to track the progress of an Agile project? Jira is an issue tracking tool. Which tool by Atlassian is used for effective collaboration among the Agile team? Which are the different effort estimation techniques? Which technique is specific to the Agile methodology? What are the 3 questions on which daily stand-up meetings are based? Which is the last event in a sprint and what is its purpose? Which are the 4 main points on which an Agile team brainstorms during a sprint retrospective? What are initiatives in Agile? Which are the types of issues that can be created in Jira? What is compatibility testing? Do you recognize the importance of smoke testing every time a new version of the build is received? What is test-driven development? What is STLC and what are the 4 main phases in it? What is a defect life cycle? Where do you report a bug if found? Which tool have you used for test case management? Can you tell two test case management applications that can be installed in Atlassian Jira? Can you recall two tools for automation testing? Can you identify one open source automation tool to test web applications? Can you identify an automation tool to test desktop applications? Let us now see some questions based on the keywords explain and summarize. Explain software development lifecycle. Explain the need for impact analysis in regression testing. Explain the format of a user story. Explain the terms severity and priority in terms of a defect. Explain sprint retrospective in Scrum. Explain the Poker estimation technique in Agile. Explain the importance of daily stand-up meetings in Agile. Summarize the contents of a test plan. Explain the process of a defects triage meeting. Explain the purpose of go-no-go decision meeting. Next, we will see some questions based on the keywords compare or differentiate. Compare the two traditional models, the waterfall model and the V model, in terms of their pros and cons. How is the agile methodology different from the traditional methodologies? Differentiate between functional and non-functional testing. Differentiate between black box and white box testing. Differentiate between reproducible and non-reproducible defects. Differentiate between smoke testing and sanity testing. Differentiate between quality control and quality assurance. Differentiate between manual testing and automation testing. Differentiate between integration testing and system testing. Differentiate between verification and validation. Differentiate between test scenario and test case. Differentiate between bug leakage and bug release. Going further, let us see some questions based on the keyword give examples. Give a few examples where waterfall model would be the suitable SDLC model. Give a few examples where agile could be the suitable SDLC model. Give an example of a bug where severity is high but priority is low. Give an example of a bug where priority is high but severity is low. Give examples of a few test scenarios in an insurance-related application. Give an example of a positive test in an e-commerce application. Give an example of a negative test in an e-commerce application. Give any two examples of a non-functional test requirement. So finally, we come to some sample questions to assess the attainment of level 3 of knowledge related to a subject. And the keywords for the same are apply or implement, prepare or use in context of a situation or a scenario. So some of those questions are, what information do you require to prepare a good bug report? How will you effectively use a collaboration tool like Confluence? When you perform a test, what steps do you take? How do you prioritize your tests? What factors might influence your decisions? How do you determine which test cases to automate versus perform manually? How will you ensure that the software is accessible to users with special needs? For instance, someone having a visual impairment should be able to use the application. You are testing a mobile app and it needs to work on various devices and screen sizes. How will you ensure compatibility testing? Suppose you encounter a critical bug in a live production environment. What will be your approach to it as a tester? How will you assign a value for severity and priority to a recently discovered bug in an e-commerce application? How will you decide if you have tested enough? What approach will you take to write test cases to test a given user story? What will you do if there is a blocker or an impediment in the task that you need to accomplish? How can you use the Pareto principle to test smarter and faster? You're working on a tight deadline for a software release and you have a large number of test cases to execute. So, what strategies would you employ to meet the deadline without compromising quality? How will you ensure that all the requirements have been tested? Well, this brings us to the end of this video. We will come up with another video on the answers to the questions presented here. Thank you.
Subscribe and press the bell icon to never miss an update.